The Dow this morning is down just a bit, 95. That's basically unchanged, but we're only open a minute. And all of this focus is on the future of trade between the U.S. and China, and it is hanging in the balance. Why? Because the president sounded more than hopeful after his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping over the weekend, announcing a 90-day truce. But the White House is sending really mixed signals over what the truce is, when it begins, and it's causing a whole lot of confusion. Joining me now, CNBC reporter Dom Chu, also with us, CNBC senior analyst Ronen Sana. I want to share this first, Dom, because the White House likes to say, you know, the media harps on things, we're out to get them, it's only negative coverage. So I'm going to share something put out by J.P. Morgan, a note put out by the U.S. investment bank J.P. Morgan on their trading note, where they write, it doesn't seem like anything was actually agreed to at the dinner. And White House officials are contorting themselves into pretzels to reconcile Trump's tweets, which seem, if not completely fabricated, then grossly exaggerated with reality. This is from J.P. Morgan, Don.
This is from J.P. Morgan, and it speaks to many of the things that we've been speaking about just over the course of the past couple of days right here on this show and elsewhere around the news media. This idea that we are still looking for clarity exactly on what happened at the G20 and what exactly will happen going forward. The issue now is whether or not the White House, the President of the United States, and his chief trade negotiators and advisors can get on the same page with regard to what they are telling everybody out there. It's not just the media, it's not just us, but it's also telling Wall Street and everybody else, the Americans and Chinese citizens, that China has to answer to, and Xi Jinping. Right now, we thought from Larry Kudlow, the senior economic advisor for President Trump, that the 90-day window was supposed to start on January 1st, when the tariffs were supposed to kick in. Now the president and the White House are clarifying it by saying that that clock started back on December 1st with the meeting with President Xi and President Trump. So all of this is equated into what happened to be a 1% move. Now, that's not insignificant, but it's 1% for the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 yesterday. We're giving back about a third of those gains this morning. So as the markets are in real time handicapping President Trump's tweets, statements from the White House, statements from Robert Lighthizer, statements from Larry Kudlow, and everybody else out there, this is how it's playing out.
Isn't that stunning? Not just handicapping, that J.P. Morgan could write about the President of the United States' tweets, which seem, if not completely fabricated, then grossly exaggerated. And what Don was just mentioning, the president just put out this tweet saying the negotiations with China have already started. Unless extended, they will end 90 days from the date of our wonderful and very warm dinner with President Xi in Argentina. Bob Lighthizer will be working closely with Mnuchin, Kudlow, Ross, and Navarro. What do you make of this, Mr. Insana?
Well, this is, I think, typical overstatement from the president, where he's really agreed to nothing new. There was no agreement at the G20. The tariffs that we have on China are still in place. They have not been increased. They've suspended any additional tariffs for this 90-day period that the president was contemplating putting on Chinese goods, which would have covered everything that comes to the United States, by the way, and now are working on these, what have been intractable problems of intellectual property theft and forced technology transfer. That's probably more than a 90-day negotiation for everything we know about negotiating with the Chinese over these very sensitive issues. So it's an open question as to whether or not the ball's really been moved forward in any way, shape, or form. We're not going to know unless we see some substantive progress between the negotiators on our side and the Chinese side.
But we do know that President Trump is neither a policy guy, a markets guy, or an economics guy. And what he has done in the past, whether it's with Kim Jong-un creating a big chaos and then delivering nothing really, NAFTA, creating big chaos, and then kind of delivering a little bit of something. It seems like we're right back there. What does it signal to you or the markets, Dom, that now Bob Lighthizer is going to be leading these conversations with China, and this guy has taken a very hard-line approach with them?
Well, he's taken a hardline approach, and for good reason. I mean, China has been accused of and is probably guilty of a lot of egregious trade policies and bad trade practices. But what it does mean for the markets overall is that there is an expectation that when you want to reach a broad-ranging, wide-sweeping, substantive trade deal that looks to correct decades worth of trade policy, that it may not happen in weeks or even months, that it may take substantially longer. Now, what the markets markets will be reacting to in the coming weeks and months will be any particular headlines that show progress one way or the other. But the term that was tossed around so much was kicking the can down the road. And that's in essence what happens with this 90-day window. What will be interesting is whether or not after that January 1st kind of old deadline comes around, if there are any substantive developments on that trade front. Right now, we're not seeing anything, and that's why the markets are reacting in a more muted way. We're not seeing a massive surge in stocks just because we think that a trade deal with the second biggest economy in the world is going to get done. The markets right now are exercising what would be characterized as a healthy degree of skepticism. They're waiting to see if anything really does happen.
Second biggest economy in the world. This isn't child's play. And what sticks out to me is the Washington Post, who writes, despite the pause in the trade war, the U.S. and China's economic relationship is forever changed. Do you agree with that? Talk about the lasting impact of these tariffs, this trade war.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think it's
That's
such a
a bold
level
statement.
of animosity that, hasn't been there before. And the way that President Trump approaches negotiations, particularly now with Asian countries, is not typical of prior administrations insofar as public humiliation has never been used successfully with Asian countries. You have to really go back door, back channel to get them to the table and then to ultimately force concessions. Where the president has made significant mistakes, too, Stephanie, is that if we had joined the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we would have isolated China in its own backyard. Had we taken other steps, like gotten closer to our other trade allies, to force China with more than just one country making the same argument to stop some of its behavioral practices that are unfair to other countries, we probably would have made more progress. And so I think that there's been a fundamental strategic error in the way in which this administration approaches trade relations. Like you mentioned, the NAFTA talks, Senator Chuck Grassley said we got basically 95% of the old NAFTA and 5% of the new NAFTA, and just a lot of drama, I'm using my own words here, to go along with it. So there are ways to do this that would have been much, much simpler. But as some have observed, the president creates a lot of drama and then claims that he solved the problem. China is a growing economy. Larry Summers has a big piece in the Financial Times this morning about China growing and whether or not the U.S. can and should stand in the way of it. They have significantly larger population than we do. But there are ways to engage to create a more constructive relationship with that country down the road.
And I haven't read it yet, but I've got a feeling Mr. Summers isn't keen on the way we're engaging right now.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.